Hello, everybody. I hope that our internet connections will really work. We're also recording this conversation or this talk, and it's amazing that we see, wow, our world really changed, and that within a very short time. And I believe that exactly what we are doing now is something really important for our time, which means to come together. In whichever way we do that, but that the community building and creating intelligent networks that are supportive, where we are relational, and that we use the relational capacities that every one of us has got, is a tremendous upgrade of resilience. And I want to walk us today first through a talk, and then maybe through a short practice. And then after the short practice, that we have a little space for Q&As. But I want to address like different parts of us today that I think are all important. And I want to start with our personal interior, like my experience as a human being. Because what these times call for is to be truly human. And before we talk about like big ideas or philosophical reflections on the situation, I think it's truly important to look, who am I as a human being? What are my fears? What are my concerns? What stress comes up in me? So my fears and my concerns and the stress that comes up in me is very important. And so many of us, I think many of us that practiced over the last, many of us decades, contemplative practices. We did, many of us that are online right now most probably did some kind of therapy, have thousands of meditation hours. And so that practice, I often say, this is the time where we all have been thrown into the river, and now it's about swimming. Because no one really knows where that river is going to now. But we know that we have to trust our swimming capacities. And that's the time. All the spiritual practice that really had an effect, which means got embodied. So all the spiritual practices that we have embodied are now part of our resilience. And so we all know that uncertainty, health-wise or economically and relationally for our families, are uncertainty is one of the best triggers for our deepest fears. And that's why I think many of you know that I'm deeply into the work with and kind of researching the dimension of collective trauma, individual and collective trauma that gets triggered in these times much, much more. And so many of our fears are, when they come up right now, everything looks more scary, and we have to have practices how to work those fears, because we are not in for a short sprint. We are in for a longer run. And to take care that we maintain our nervous system's capacity to constantly self-regulate, like to see, oh wow, it's uncertain, I'm getting scared, I'm getting stressed. And then there are two options. Either those fears grow and grow and grow and become kind of more and more overwhelming, so that I start drowning in my fears, or I become avoidant and distant. And I believe we have to watch out for both, because if I become avoidant and distant, then I can talk about the situation. I can have great mental ideas, but I'm actually not anymore fully in as a human being with my heart. And so the vulnerability of our heart in a crisis situation is part of a tremendously important supercomputer. Like on the level of our heart, when our hearts are open, there is a coherence function built into the human supercomputer. And I think that's what the times call for. This time needs to be run by love. And run by love is not just a slogan, it's now my practice to stay connected to my vulnerability is very important. So to stay connected to my vulnerability is very important, because that keeps my heart open, and that keeps me in a kind of an inner coherence field, and I'm able to create that coherence around me. So many of the fears that come up now, they are actually not really related to the current moment. Many of the fears that come up is fear and stress that is stored in our bodies, either from our developmental time as children, or what our ancestors went through, the whole collective trauma field. Many people experience fears that come up when it looks like that things are becoming scarce, that we are threatened health-wise. So we need ways how to work that. And we will go afterwards through a practice, how I think what's a helpful practice to continuously ground myself, that I find resourced parts of my body. Our body, I believe in this time, is very important. Our body is not just 30, 50, 75 years old. My body is hundreds of thousands of years old. And the intelligence that is stored in my body is the concentrated liquid of humanity in every one of us. Our ancestors went through crisis already. And the resilience of it sits here. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. And I think that's very important. The cells of our bodies, our emotional systems, our mental systems, our capacities to relate, our capacities to do and give in times of scarcity, to do things that are courageous, where we support each other, where we stay open to each other. These capacities are in us. And it's very important to remember them and even invoke them, to consciously connect to the fact that generations after generations, we had already crises around the world, in different parts of the world, but we know how to be in that. And so when I look at my own internal process, that I first of all keep a tracking of my inner awareness. How do I feel right now? Who am I today? And then I can check in with myself if I get really speedy and stressed, or if I get avoidant. And then I can come back to myself, say, okay, I take a deeper breath, I connect to my body, I see where my body is open and alive, because the live parts of my body are the live parts of my nervous system. So I can connect for a few moments to my body and really get to know the parts of my body where I feel myself. That's how I can ground myself. That's how my nervous system can exhale. And then I can include my stress, my fear, and presence it. And as I said before, we are all human beings. And I believe we are living in a time where our humanity is being asked for, at least in the first place. And so when I learn to regulate myself, and I can do it myself, it's fantastic. If not, and maybe I'm alone at home and stuff comes up in me, or anyway, also stuff can happen in our economic workplace and income, so that we really reach out and we process first that part with somebody else if it's too overwhelming for me. And we create community, supportive community. Because as I said before, we have been thrown into a river and we all don't know where we are swimming to. And we need to support each other while we are swimming. And so we will do it afterwards. We will do a practice together, a short contemplation of self-regulation, how I can regulate myself and how I can be with the kind of uncertainty and the effects of my uncertainty. And so that's one thing. The other thing is that there is co-regulation. I said before, it's very intelligent, more often than not, to reach out, to have conversations, because fear can become a stagnation in our system. Or if I keep on sharing my inner process with others, not compulsively, but if I keep on sharing what's happening for me, I move energy. And so compassionate listening, like that I really presence you when you tell me how you feel, and you presence me when I tell you, without giving immediately good advice, just to be there for each other and to feel each other, is great. Every nervous system has potentially has a capacity to co-regulate another nervous system. If you are very hurt, maybe it's kind of reduced, but that capacity is a tremendously important function today. When you tell me about your stress, and I can be with you, not because I want to give you intellectual advice, because I just want to be with you. And I want to feel you. Then, between us, we create a field. Our two nervous systems, or in small groups, we create fields. And those fields create stability. And I believe what we need right now is to create coherent fields where we can digest together. And what do we digest? We digest our individual and collective past. So we digest our individual and our collective past together. Because the ghosts of the past, all the undigested material that sits in our nervous system, and there is quite enough there individually, my own shadows and my own pre-traumatization, and the ancestral and collective traumatization is a lot of energy. And what this time shows us is that many of these ghosts start to come up. And one message of this time is to digest the stuff that's coming up. One message of this time is to digest the material that's coming up, individually and collectively. I think that's the way how to ground ourselves and keep us and our social networks more grounded. And somehow, as a side effect, I think the whole global situation shows us the level of disembodiment, like how we are not really embodied in nature. I believe one way that we see right now is kind of a global reset. It's when we would say when the structure is not strong enough to contain the growth. When there's more and more and more and more growth, without grounding that growth in our bodies and through our bodies in nature, then things go out of balance. And in the In the spiritual science, we say there is space, there's energy and structure. Space is the capacity to reflect. Space is the capacity to digest. And what do we digest? Our experience, so that we can stay in a regulated space. Undigested past, like trauma and shadows and living too fast, is filling up our storage in our nervous system with material. And we don't have endless storage. So the stress levels, the internal stress levels are rising. And that's where relational attunement, nervous system synchronization, intelligent community building, really being with each other, but not to just, as I said before, not just to give immediately mental advice, because mental advice often separates us more than it connects us. What is more called for is a heartfelt connectivity where we feel each other and we learn to co-regulate each other. So when my friend, a family member, my neighbor is really stressed, feeling the person while listening to the person creates often a sense of relaxation. And the next step, I believe, is building intelligent community networks. We all have to invest now time in group presencing. There is an amazing passage in the Bible when the Hebrew people on Mount Sinai had a mass awakening. What it says is that the voice of God, the highest universal truth, spoke to the whole community, not just to Moses, but to the whole community. And everybody said afterwards, the voice of God spoke to me personally. Everybody said, the voice of God spoke to me personally. And why I'm saying that is because there is a principle how the collective and the individual are connected. That the most universal is not general. The most universal is very specific, which means on the whole spiritual journey or in a developmental journey, the individual expression is important because all of us are kind of the individual expression of the most universal. But it also means, and I think many people that were already in intense groups, workshops, seminars, in very intense team periods where teams work together, we know that group presencing is a very powerful function in humanity. So group presencing is a very powerful function. And the higher is the group coherence, the more intelligent is everybody within that group. And that's interesting. Why? So there is a kind of a cloud computing function that is more than just multiple individuals in the same space. So that cloud computing function, I believe, is a very powerful healing resource. And it's also a very powerful resource for innovation. So intelligent networks, and there are many networks that when we add the right ingredients, like we said before, individual processing that I know how to regulate myself. Then co-regulation, functional attuned relationship and listening, and group presencing. When we come together like now, there are thousands of people online right now, and we all can get a sense even if we are sitting thousands of miles apart, all over the world most probably, we can get a sense of that group field. That group field is a tremendously intelligent expression that exceeds the sum of us. Right now, as I am talking, we can feel thousands of people being tuned in, dialed in to this moment. And I have seen in my workshops with big groups of people how that group function of group coherence is tremendously healing over and over and over again. So I have seen in many, many groups, with big groups, hundreds up to 1,000 people, that when we come together and we attune to each other as a group, so everybody in the group feels everybody else, not as individuals, but as a field, it creates a tremendous healing resource for everybody. And we need that function now. Because fear has the tendency that if there's a collective fear, there's a tendency of downgrading or disintegrating higher functions in consciousness. And what we need now is an up-leveling of coherence so that we stabilize the collective field. And that stabilization of the collective field is actually, I believe, what we have to learn in such a crisis. So the three elements that I was talking about is self-regulation, relational regulation, group coherence, creating intelligent networks, coming together with a purpose, an intention, as small teams, as big teams, in hospitals, in organizations, in people who work remotely from home, to really support also when we work remotely from home, as many companies do now, we have to invest time in the collective coherence so that we have calls or Zoom calls where we all come together just for the sake of coming together. Even if that at first doesn't look like an efficient thing to do, it's an important thing to do because it keeps the organism of the company or the institution kind of synchronized. And I believe that's also important for our healthcare system, to upgrade the immune system through every one of us being mindful and supportive of the healthcare system, but also to have kind of practices how to strengthen the whole system of a hospital, for example. I think that's tremendously important. And a few more things, and then I would love to do the practice and then to respond to some of the questions that came in. The last point, so we talked about the individual, the I, thou, the we, and now we talk about, for a moment, about the spiritual resourcing. As important as it seems at first, the spiritual resourcing is about presencing. Presencing means that I come back, like through mindfulness practices, as we will do a bit later, that again and again to what's happening now, and to be able to differentiate between things that come up from the past and what's actually happening now. And then to help myself to integrate what's coming up from the past. Often we say, in these moments, we need hope. And even if that's very human, I believe that hope is also kind of the equivalent of the undigested fear that is in the system. So when we say we need hope, often we have fear. In presence, we have an inner connection to the essence of life. We have an inner connection to the essence of life. That's where presence is the place where the future is being born. Presence is the birthplace of the future and is the integration tool for the past. So presence is a tremendously important resource. Presence is the birthplace of the future, and presence is the integration process of the past. So it's both. Presence is tremendously important. And when we look, for example, at Otto Scharmer's work, like the theory U, that is widely accepted or like widespread also in many business circles, the U is about presence, presencing. And presencing is a very important function of innovation. And right now, we need a lot of social micro-innovation. Like we need local social micro-innovation. And I believe presencing is a tremendously important function of that. So when we have local communities, networks, or global communities and networks, and through presencing, we can up-level our capacity for micro-innovation. We need now a lot of local and obviously also global innovation. But many people together, also in local communities, can have a lot of innovative capacities unleashed in order to deal with the situation in unexpected forms. And so local and global innovation is a function of presencing. That's why we want to support that aspect of us. And the spiritual resource lies in presence. So since many people have more time now, because many of us are at home, many of us are like more grounded or down. We cannot really leave our home places. So we can use some of the time to do mindfulness practices, contemplative and meditation practices, in order to come to a deeper state of presence. As I said before, the deeper state of presence is the birthplace of the future and is the integration function of the past. So it's something very powerful. And so I would love for us to, because we are so many online right now, let's see if the internet connection makes it possible that we can have a short attunement, just a few minutes, and then I would love to respond to, there are many questions that you wrote that came in, and maybe we can respond to some more specific questions that are up in the field right now. So to start with, if in uncertain times, when I get more stressed, when I get more afraid, what can I do? Let's remember that our breath, everyone online right now, is breathing. And everybody online right now is breathing from the first few minutes after our birth. And our breath went with us through the most difficult and the most beautiful moments of our life. Our breath is deeply wired on every level of our development. When I was 5 months old, when I was 2 years old, when I was 17, when I was 35, and today I'm still breathing. Every one of us does. So the breath, connecting to the breath, activates like a tube all the breaths that we have ever taken. So when I connect to my breath, I connect to kind of a resourcing system in my nervous system. It's tremendously important for me to regulate myself. So when I feel more stressed or more scared, and I think, okay, consciously I connect to my breath, and I slow down the exhalation of my like my exhaling, I slow it down. And let's do this for a moment. So I slow down the way I exhale, and I follow my exhalation into my body. And I take another breath and I follow my exhalation even deeper into the body. And then I become aware of sitting, my body posture, the movement of my breath in my body. And I'm sitting. And I can enjoy the simplicity of sitting, breathing, and I connect to the more alive parts of my body. There are for sure areas in my body that are more alive, open, where I can feel my body better. For many people, either the hands, or the feet, or belly, the chest. I look, where do I feel streaming sensations? Where do I feel aliveness, vitality, strong body presence? And I stay there for a few moments, because it's easy to come back to a very activated mind. When I'm scared, I might think much more. And I need to stay for some moments in the body. Take another breath. Take another breath. And to feel that my body is a cup. My body is a vessel. My body is the planet. My body is nature. Soil, carbon, minerals, metals. That's the substance of the planet. Through my body, I can ground myself and feel nature. And then once I have a good sense of my body, maybe there are open parts, maybe I feel stress in other parts, and I can co-presence them. I welcome stress. Yes, I'm stressed. Yes, I'm open. And I don't look for how it should be, I look for what is. Presence helps me to digest my overwhelm. And from that I look into my emotional field. I see what is my current emotional state. Am I scared? Am I happy? Am I sad? Am I numb? Which means that I don't feel any emotion. And whatever I find, there is no, oh, I should be feeling, whatever. I just look how I feel. And I confirm, yes, maybe I'm a bit scared. Maybe I'm a bit joyful. Yes, I'm numb. I'm overwhelmed. When I'm numb, It means that I'm overwhelmed. That's an important state too. And I just confirm this. Yes, I am overwhelmed. And then I have a look at my mental capacity. Is my mind racing? Is my mind calm? Spacious? Maybe my mind is blank. I'm kind of a bit spacey, which is different. And I just get a look. Sometimes my mind is open, inspired, creative. Sometimes my mind is a bit tight, busy with many thoughts that come back again and again. And I just look. Just notice. And again, I just want to confirm what's there. Mindfulness means that my awareness is attuned to my current perception. And then for a moment I can look, okay, what's actually aware of my body, emotions, mind? What's the awareness in me that can sense those perceptions, inner perceptions consciously? And I pay attention to the awareness itself. Right. And then maybe finally, before we move over to some questions, again to feel, even if that's at the beginning more abstract, we are thousands of people right now tuning in with the same meditation. And to get a sense of a whole community being more and more synchronized, individually presenced, and collectively connected. And even if we don't see each other, if we just set the intention to say, okay, we are all around the world, a community of people with a similar intention right now, and we can get a sense. I can get a sense through my body. My nervous system can feel. There's a collective presencing. With other people that are also most probably in a similar situation, facing uncertainty in their lives. Maybe have fear come up. Be stressed in the current situation. Be worried about relatives. Or also be very present in this moment, creative, willing to give and support others that need it. Many of us will always have resources, presence, relation, skills to offer, and some of us need it. And that helps us to stay in a place of responsibility, the ability to respond to the current moment in time. So responsibility doesn't mean duty, it's the ability to respond to the current moment, current global moment, individually and collectively. And that's very different, because reactivity, when I'm reactive, the past runs the show. I do things that I did in the past. I use patterns of my behavior or responding and relating that I've learned in the past. And when I feel tight, then that's what's coming up. Whereas responsiveness is a function of resonance. It's a function of open relation. The ability to respond to the current crisis. And that's always adding energy into the system. Responding means giving. Responding means presencing, feeling. And then my body, my emotions, my mind, they all work together as more as a unit. And that's the foundation of human relation.
Could you address specifically what the healthcare providers on the front lines are dealing with as we speak, and both personal stress and the collective trauma that gets brought up to the surface when you are a healthcare worker trying to save the most sacred, people's lives? With shortages of supplies, this also reminds me of what happened during Chernobyl, when doctors didn't have personal protective equipment and still were on the front lines.
I think that's why in these times we see how we as a society have to be very supportive in as many ways as we can to support the healthcare system. It's very important that we provide relational support, that we provide support how we can decompress the stress, because the more patients come in, the more the pressure rises. And as we said, we are in for not a sprint, and that's very important. It's not a thing of 2 weeks. That's why when we get burned out on the way, it doesn't make much sense, because this weakens our individual and collective immune system. So we need to feed in kind of moments, spaces, supportive environments that where we can digest the stress that's coming up. And as we, especially in the healthcare system, all of us, but there especially, because from a place of tightness, it's very hard to support patients and clients that are anyway also very stressed and concerned about their health, or in fear or existential fear. And so healthcare professionals are not only busy with their own internal stress, but they're actually confronted all day long with external kind of crisis. And so that's why if the fear or the stress inside rises, the kind of balancing that our nervous system can do to keep patients in a good kind of supportive relation as well is getting reduced. And I think we need to upgrade this so that we can that we can digest together what's the whole stress that the system is in. And I believe that the population, since we are anyway in this kind of more or less lockdown in different places, and many of the regular processes are not working, we can actually support in every creative way possible that is acceptable by the healthcare system, that to be of support. And I think there are many small ways how we can do this. So I think that's a very important function. Otherwise, like, we burn the resources too fast, and when we are in for a long run, we need energy. We need enough energy, and so working sustainably, given the emergency situation, sustainably is a very important part. And there are many things of what I mentioned today. If we apply some of it regularly and we practice it together, it's going to be already a huge relief.
Sarah asks, a key challenge for me is that I get lost in and overwhelmed by feeling what others feel. Can you please talk a bit about how to deal with the challenge of feeling overwhelmed when feeling others' pain and struggle? And a few people have mentioned, how do they help others who don't have a meditation or spiritual practice?
Right. Yeah, that's what I meant before. Now we are all in the river and we are swimming. That's very important. Now the skill is being tested. You know, it's one thing to sit in a seminar center and or on retreats or somewhere close to the ocean and watch the beach and the ocean, but it's another thing to apply this in practice. And so that means that we will not be together only with people, as we said, that we might even be used to through our sangha and retreats, but we are actually exposed to a different reality, and that's the practice test. And it's very important that I believe language is very important. So when I say, "Oh, I'm stressed because I feel other people's feelings," in a way, yes, that's true, but I would reframe it and say, when my own stress is in resonance with the stress in my environment, I feel even more stressed. Because then I take my mind's notion off that it's because of the other people, because then I can go back to myself and say, wow, when people around me are stressed, I feel my own stress more. And I think that's a different way to frame it, because then I know that I can take care of my inner stress. So this means I come back to myself. In the inner work, we always say, in doubt, come back to yourself. In doubt, when something is not clear, we need to make contact to ourselves, because that's where the tree is rooted. And we might be all in different levels of sensitivity, and the higher is our sensitivity, the more rooted needs to be the tree. Which means that the tree, when we ground ourselves with a breath, exactly as we did it before, when I feel more stressed, even if I talk to somebody, I can take a breath during the conversation, another breath, ground myself in the body while I listen to somebody and see, wow, I get stressed, my energy goes more up. How can I regulate myself and ground myself, feel my feet, take a breath, and feel, yeah, I'm getting more stressed because I listen to you, and you also have a kind of an economic uncertainty, and this reminds me of my own healthcare concern. And so that we stay in this constant practice of regulation as far as it's possible is very important. But I think the reframing is important, because, and this is not just for you, the person that asked, but in general for us, because we might say, because of the collective situation, I feel more fear. And in a way that's true, but often we frame it, locks it in. It's kind of, there's very little room, because of course there will be a lot of collective fear, but it shows me, first of all, my own fears. And I can work on my own fears to ground them and digest them, and not wanting to disconnect from my fear even more. Because the fear is anyway often past emotions that are stored in us. This is often related to trauma or attachment processes that were stressful. And when they get triggered now, and we want to disconnect from that fear even more, then we will just feel more stressed. We can do this over some time, but as I said, we are in for a longer run. And I can't do that too long, because then I will feel more and more tight, more and more stressed, and I will actually be less and less connected to the best parts of my brain, the best parts of my nervous system, the best parts of my thinking, my relating. So portion by portion, we want to digest the past that comes up in humanity right now in order to ground ourselves. And that's, I think, what allows us to use the the most, like the latest parts of evolution, the best. And so that helps us to really find great solutions in the time being.
Thomas, a few people seem to want to, have an intention, maybe a prayer. A couple of people, Ed says, Thomas, first of all, if something happens to me, I love you and appreciate all your teachings through the years. As you know, I'm an emergency physician in the US. Do you have practical advice how to group presence with ER team? We are bracing for the impact, which has not come, but we are running low on critical medical supplies already, especially personnel and protective equipment. Rosa says, there are thousands, maybe millions that are losing their jobs in Mexico. Can we intention something for them during this period?
Yeah, what like one intention is that we have to let go of how the world was yesterday. That world is gone. And that's very important. I mean, for many of us, many things are happening now rapidly, and many things we had don't exist anymore. The world changed in a blink of an eye. It's kind of, we are in a different world setup. And it's not that many things might not come back again, but we don't know that because we don't know where it's going. So how to release ourselves from what we knew and to be really present, because now we are swimming. If I look back all the time, actually, why did I jump into this river? Who pushed me into the river? Why is all of this happening? And this is not very helpful because I might bump into rocks in the river because I have to swim now. And that's very important. So as much as we can, the things that are happening, they are happening. They are kind of a collective force. And that's why for us it's very important to look forward and say, okay, every day there are news, every day other things are happening that we can't really control. And if that's the case, then it's just, okay, we all need to align our spiritual capacity and reduce like our need for solutions, which means that we look, okay, what is the next step that we can do that is doable? Because sometimes when I look too far ahead, I feel paralyzed because I don't know. And so in order to reduce that paralysis, I say, okay, what's the next step that shows up in front of me? And I think for Ed, for your question, for the healthcare system, I think even if it looks like, because trauma always comes with the feeling we don't have enough time and there's not enough space. There's too much. But too much is a symptom of individual and collective traumatization. And we see it reawakened in our culture. The collective trauma field is speaking all the time. And it's clouding our kind of decision-making processes. And it's clouding our clarity. So I think one intention is to really look forward, to make the steps that are possible, not the ones that we can't see, because they will be just stressful. And the other one is in the healthcare field, even if it looks like there is not enough time for some personal regulation and some team regulation, as far as it's possible, when we insert it, and it doesn't need to be, they don't have to be long practices. We don't need to invest a long time, but we have to invest some time into the sustainability that we create group coherence. And group coherence can just be a moment where we come together in a morning meeting, and we have a moment where we attune to ourselves, attune to each other, and feel ourselves as a team, as a group. And that adds intelligence. That adds intelligence to the system. Even if at the beginning, our rational mind might be very skeptical and say, oh, why? It's a waste of time. We don't have the time. We need to do other things. And I think that's the answer of the trauma function in our society. Because if we add this time, we have a higher coherence and we are actually more effective together as a team. And I think that's on the long run, and I think we're in for a longer run, the more sustainable part. Yeah, first of all, we see also like in how many people tuned in that there is a real need for coming together, and I'm sure we will do kind of more of it also in our community, and as it happens also in other communities. And yeah, I believe that when, you know, in these times, love needs to run the show. And I think very important, when it feels scarce, it's time to give. And so when that function, as I said before, like when trauma gets activated, often it feels like there's not enough time and there's not enough space. And I might feel that I become more and more detached. And so to come back to a space of vulnerability so that I can feel myself, I believe is very important. Even if that sounds at the beginning very simple, when it's too simple. Like why, like it sounds so simple. Yeah, it's simple, but it's actually like a constant inner work that we need to do, or at least some of us need to do, in order to stay in that place of responsiveness. Because responsibility, like the ability to respond, is, I think, what we need now the most, because that comes of a deep place of intelligence, the ability to respond.